This is the voice of the Report of the Week, signing on. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone listening. This is VORW International, the voice of the Report of the Week, signing on this Thursday, the 12th of September, 2019, the year being. So thank you for tuning in to this newest edition of VORW, a weekly podcast. Really, the whole point of it is to offer miscellaneous, wide-ranging discussion. Some weeks it'll just be about current events. Some weeks it will take a more moral, philosophical turn. Sometimes we'll have some fun discussion on conspiracies and cryptids and the unknown. And other weeks the discussion may very well be cut and dry. It might just feature opening up the mailbag or talking about whatever is on my mind. In short, a free-form weekly talk program, roughly about an hour in length, though I don't time myself. So if the show ends up being 40 minutes, then it's 40 minutes. If it's an hour and 40 minutes, then that's what the length of it ends up being. So it's as long as it is, or as short as it is. Today's program is going to feature discussion on the question which I asked in the last show, and that was, do you think looks matter in politics? And again, what spawned that, number one, I should stress, as a disclaimer, understanding how things are nowadays, this is not any sort of partisan discussion. This isn't going to include the usual finger-pointing, as many political discussions often do nowadays, where, so it seems, if you even wish to discuss politics, you have to blame someone else. And you have to say, like, let's just give this discussion for example. Nowadays it seems like it would always have to entail something like, yeah, I do think that looks matter in politics, and that's because the Democrats look like this, or the Republicans look like this. No, absolutely. This is not what this program is about. As a matter of fact, there will be no overt political attacks against any side in this show. And likewise, this is the way I feel about it anyway, a commentary, not on one mindset or another, but the political system as a whole. The left, the right, the center, everyone and anyone in between. So that's where it stands. An apolitical discussion, although about, in some regard, a political issue or topic. But it can be done, and it will be done in today's program. So we're going to be getting to that. And we'll be taking your feedback, your audio messages, and of course your written correspondence. Two other little anecdotes that I did wish to bring up. Maybe three, maybe two. We'll see what happens. Number one, I just wanted to thank everyone who did support the broadcast to the Bahamas. As promised, I would give an update, and I'll keep it short, but I have established that broadcast to the Bahamas. It is 3 hours a week, every week, Saturday night, Sunday night, and Thursday night, on the frequency of 5010 kilohertz, and it's a new program. So I now produce 3 shows at a minimum every week. This program has an interesting format, but it's what I feel is best. It features that light entertainment layout with some music, but more importantly, the first 15 minutes of the show feature hard news. And it's a lot of work to do, but I think it's worth it. Where what I will do at the beginning of each program is I will go out that day, I will look at what's going on in the world, and I will find about 3 international news headlines and stories, 2 national news stories, 2 stories pertinent to the Bahamas, a science and technology piece, a health piece, maybe a general interest piece, and then also weather updates for the Bahamas and the Atlantic tropical basin. And I'll compile it, make a script, type it up, and then I will go ahead and read and comment on it for 15 minutes of the show. So it also features an active news segment to keep listeners who tune in informed and up to date. And so that's really how it differs. Best way to put it. But it's a lot of work, but in my opinion, again, it's worth it to do. So a huge thank you to everyone who made that a reality. And the signal is great in the Bahamas and the area, so that's even better that it is reaching its intended audience. Likewise, and I'm going to spend as minimum time on this as absolutely possible. Just understand that with this program, for some reason the videos on YouTube keep getting demonetized one after the next. No other platforms are monetized. Consider supporting the program via PayPal to VORWINFO@gmail.com or via Patreon at patreon.com/thereportoftheweek. If you'd like to advertise on this program and get your message out to a wide audience, send me an email inquiring at VORWINFO@gmail.com. See, I kept that one very short, because in truth, I absolutely detest ever even having to talk about those things, because it's not right. I don't like bringing that up, and I'd rather just do the show, so that's what I'm doing today. I was looking at the calendar, and it's kind of surreal to think. I know it's a morbid subject, but something I still wanted to share my thoughts on anyway. That yesterday, September 11th, it's been 18 years since the 9/11 attacks. 18 years. It's incredible. And, of course, I was quite young. But I remember September 11th. And I'm willing to bet that if I lived anywhere else, I wouldn't have remembered that day, because again, I was quite young, but having lived in southern New York, of course, it hit home, and it was a very early memory, so of course I didn't remember the day as it played out in its entirety, but I remember during that day, even in my mind then, at such a young age, I remembered that it was something significant that was going down. And I remember that day how clear the sky was. You look at the videos, it was a picturesque, absolutely clear, beautiful day. And I remember when the news broke, just how taken back everyone was, and I understand. I absolutely understand why. Even when I sometimes watch the videos of it, it's surreal to think that these towers came down like that, and of course the resulting death and destruction and all of that. I remember the non-stop coverage on television. I remember the whole area in the resulting days had this very unpleasant scent in the air, and obviously that was because of all the clouds of the debris that had swept over the region. It smelt like burnt plastic is how I remember it. And I don't think that was very good to breathe in, but there is no other choice. All the air outside smelled like that for a while. I remember wondering if it was going to happen again, and I remember even discussing with one of my classmates, as young as we were, I remember I was asking him, he was telling me that his mother worked in the World Trade Center, and that she just barely escaped, that she had to run down the stairs, and obviously the elevators were not an option there. It was on one of the higher floors, thankfully under where the impact was. But I just remember even then, despite being young, it was a very surreal time. And retrospectively, reflecting on it, it's still surreal to think this actually happened. It's terrifying, really. Best way to put it. That's how I would say anyway. Absolutely terrifying. And I think even to this day, 18 years later, a very important but equally sensitive issue. That's how I feel about it anyway. It's not something that people should refrain from talking about or discussing, but at the same time, I think there still needs to be, at the very least, a certain type of respect especially given toward those who worked so hard to try and save as many people as they could, and to all those who lost their lives in it. So that's what it comes down to. I just wanted to share a few thoughts there. First and foremost, as is tradition, as is a feature, a staple of every VORW broadcast, let's give out the contact address, but more importantly, the question and topic for next week's show. And the way that this works, as it does with every program, I will give out a question. And it's not like, what's 2 plus 2 or something like that. It's open-ended. It's in order to get your opinion and your feedback, something that there is really no definitive answer to. And I'll shout it out, and then as a listener, if you want to share your response, and it can be anything. Like I said, I welcome, as long as it's appropriate, any and all viewpoints, I just let you guys kind of have the floor and go for it. And then you can write in, submit your feedback in writing, or you can pick up a microphone or anything on your phone or any recording device, spew it out verbally, and then send me the audio file. And either way, then in the next show, we'll get to your answers and your responses and all of that good stuff. So here's the question for this week's program. And like I said, this one especially is extremely open-ended. There is no definitive answer as far as we are concerned at this point in time. We just don't know. There's no way to prove it, no way to disprove it. So as a result, I would love to know what you guys think about this one, and maybe why you feel this way. And even if you just say, look, I don't really know, it's just a gut feeling that I have, that's completely fine also. Or just what you think about it overall. So here we go. This one is kind of in regards to the universe, okay? So like I said, we're getting into those things that can't really be proven or disproven. You always hear from time to time different theories about the universe, how things are, if we are alone, so on and so forth. And one thing that'll get discussed from time to time is if there are other universes out there. Is this reality that we live in the only one, and that's it? Or are there multiple universes, parallel universes? Are there an infinite number of different universes out there? So, my question really is, do you think there are parallel universes? If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. Either way, I would love to hear from you and know what you think about this. And like I said, there's no way to prove it or disprove it. So your opinion is everything. Let me know what you think. VORWINFO@gmail.com. That's VORWINFO@gmail.com. Like I said, now you can spell it out in writing, send it in that way, just send an email there. Or again, you can pick up your microphone or audio recording device and shout it out. And either way, I will play it on the show next week, and we will get your response and feedback out. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think there are other universes, other parallel universes out there? Not necessarily parallel ones that are totally different? Or do you think we are one and only, we're the only thing going? What do you think it is? As for me, to be quite honest, I have no idea. I am completely on the fence on this one. I take a neutral, middle-of-the-road type of position on this. I don't adamantly believe necessarily in one or the other. But for me, with this one, I feel, I'd say that there's a good chance of either one. For instance, if, let's say, other universes end up getting discovered, or somehow the proof emerges that is a possibility, I'm not going to be, of course, I think we will all be amazed, but I won't necessarily be too surprised to think, yeah, well, I did see that as a possibility, absolutely. Whereas if it's revealed as, let's say, this is the only one we got, again, I'd be surprised, and I'd kind of think, well, it's kind of a bummer, but maybe that's just the way things are meant to be. And that's just how it is. And, after all, this might be the only one that matters, regardless of number at this point in time, anyway. So I'm interested in your thoughts, anyway. And with that now, let's go over to your responses, whether you think looks matter in politics or whether they don't. We received a good variety of very articulately written pieces of correspondence, as well as recorded feedback as well. So let's go over to a few. First, we got an email coming in from BG, who says, "Unfortunately, with looks being readily viewable today, most people make an instant decision about people. A lot also don't understand the difference in degrading a person about looks and satire about a certain viewpoint. I had to leave a group for that reason. Members were supposed to post memes about this political figure's mistakes and views, but instead it deteriorated into making horrible remarks about their looks, their private life, etc. They just don't seem to understand the difference." So that was from BG. Thank you for your feedback there. It is interesting, and I think, this is one of those things that a lot of people get caught up with. Where does one draw the line between, let's say, satire and reality? Like a lot of the times you'll see some people that'll say or even do horrible things, and they'll say, well, but it was just satire, right? I didn't really mean it. I didn't really mean what I said or did. It was a satire. But where do you draw the line? Because sometimes you see certain examples of things, and you're like, yeah, but that's not really satire. That's just, doing the wrong thing. But then, look, you could even go further and you can say, yeah, but what defines doing the wrong thing or the right thing, etc., etc. Thank you, BG, for your feedback there. Let's go over to Abby. She writes, "I believe looks do matter. I personally wish they didn't, but unfortunately to most they do matter. Politicians who look good, fit societal trends, naturally appear more competent to us. A great example is the first televised debate between Nixon and JFK. When polls were conducted, the majority of those who listened to the debate via radio believed that Nixon easily won. However, the majority of those who watched it on television, which was most Americans, thought Kennedy won by a landslide. Though Nixon was a strong debater, he looked physically bad and did not connect with the camera. Kennedy, however, was young, good-looking, and engaged with the camera. Guess who got mocked? And guess who got elected president? I think it is the animal nature to care about what things look like, especially public figures. However, while there's nothing wrong with finding someone to look unappealing initially, if someone cannot eventually look past appearances, it's a major flaw. Even more so, nobody should be bullied based on how they look. It is childish and low. Politicians need to be judged based on policy above all else. Unfortunately, the reality is that looks ultimately matter way more to many people." And that was from Abby. Thank you, Abby. And absolutely, look, you look at the way the world functions, especially in the U.S., but in many other places as well. We see it all around us. People are very, very visually focused. And of course, that carries over into the world of politics. And in regards to the public opinion, the representation of those who govern us, or those who are trying to get elected to govern us. And it was good that you brought up the debate between Nixon and JFK, the first one. Absolutely. That one was I think it was the very first televised presidential debate. And yes, undoubtedly, Nixon was not very camera-friendly at the time, but JFK, he knew how to take advantage of this newfound medium, and he pulled it off, absolutely. Alright, let's go over to some of the listeners who are calling in. Let's go over to Michael in Utah. What's your feedback, Michael?
Hello, this is my first time calling in, and I'd like to apologize. I've got a bit of a cold this week. Not that you would know how I normally sound, but I just wanted to respond to your question on whether or not looks matter in politics. And I do not believe they should matter at all, but unfortunately they seem to matter quite a bit to too many people. And there are two things that I thought of when pondering this question, and one is that people are so bent on tearing down one another that they're willing to stoop to any level to do so. And the second is, it seems that people in today's society at least feel that they are too busy. Maybe oftentimes they are, or maybe they choose to spend their time doing things that are maybe less important, and so they don't take the time to look into important political topics and matters. And so unfortunately, I think oftentimes a lot of people, the only thing they know about some of these politicians is simply the way they look, and so they choose to attack that. I think it's unfortunate. I wish people, number one, were a little bit kinder, took matters a little bit more seriously. I think if we did that, we'd all be better for it. I appreciate the question, and thank you for taking my call.
And thank you, Michael. Good point there. I think a lot of people do not do any sort of research into candidates, or, they really get the Cliff Notes version, and, that's just what they go off of. Another thing that you see a lot when it comes down to primary elections, on any side, and really in any election, that initially, it always takes some time for candidates to, go ahead and fully express themselves and explain themselves and become established, get that rooting down. But before that happens, you'll have a field of candidates of all various backgrounds and qualifications and viewpoints and so on. And sometimes you'll have frontrunner who just has that name recognition. For instance, you see that right now in the Democrat primaries that, of course, a lot of people are talking about. There's still a long ways to go. But when you look at the polls one after one, usually it's Joe Biden who's leading. And I think one big reason, yes, you do have people that agree with what he says, but also because he has that name recognition. People like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren might have a degree of name recognition themselves. I think more people already know who Joe Biden is, and they might just not really process. Everyone else will say, oh, yeah, Joe Biden, okay, I know who this guy is, right? He was the VP. Okay, all right, yeah, I'll go for him. And at first, that name recognition, because people just won't research everyone else. They'll just go for the one name that they know. But then hopefully with time, various candidates will, again, be able to establish their viewpoint better. And then people will say, yeah, well, I do know who Joe Biden is, but maybe I think, this guy has a better policy, or I think would make a better president. Or you might have some people that'll say, yeah, I know where all the other candidates stand, but I'm still a fan of Biden. Or then you might have someone who will say, well, now that I see everyone, I'm not a fan of any of them, and everything in between. Right, but no matter what, look, who you support, who you don't support, what political affiliation you are, always research the candidates and make that qualified decision as to who you personally feel is best fit for the job. Support who you support, but just research and make sure of all the options out there you feel, you personally, pick the one you're most comfortable with. Alright, let's go over to Chris in New York City. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Regarding politicians being criticized for wearing something that's regarded to be outside the norm, or just looking on in general, I think it's a waste of time and shouldn't really be discussed. For example, on one of the national Democratic debate stages, I think it was one of the moderators, they asked Andrew Yang, why doesn't he wear a tie? And it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Can we talk about policies or values? And this is usually why I stick to independent content creators like yourself and many others on YouTube that give, for the most part, unbiased opinions and don't interject their beliefs onto the viewers. But on the other hand, I think there has to be some sort of standard, just look professional, look like you carry yourself very well. If you're going to run for president, you have to look very presentable. But for the most part, people should get judged for no reason. Like Trump and his small hands, you talk about his orange skin, or even when Obama said he didn't like ketchup on his hot dogs. It's like, this doesn't have to do with what he believes in, his politics or his values, and it shouldn't really be talked about.
Thank you for your viewpoint, Chris. And yes, of course, people were mentioning about Andrew Yang. He's the one candidate that, he still wears the suit, and he wears the suit jacket and everything, but he never wears the tie. Kind of like a business casual look. But I don't really think that should be too big of an issue. People should be more focused on his policies, whether they feel that those would work out or not, rather than the neckwear or lack thereof that he may be wearing. He still looks professional, don't get me wrong. I always like suits. I mean, that's self-explanatory. But especially in a political debate, that should be one of the last things that should ever be brought up, because it's, truth be told, irrelevant to what's going on. And one other thing that I remember, especially since I know you're from New York City, I remember Bill de Blasio, when he first was elected mayor of New York City. I remember watching some of the New York City news. This was back when I lived in the area. And I remember they were talking about how he was... I still kind of laugh at the sheer absurdity of it. They were talking about how he was, eating a slice of pizza. What was it, like with a knife and a fork or something? And I was like, alright, yeah, I know people feel strongly about their pizza, but is that really what needs to be dominating news stations? I mean, surely there are more newsworthy events than the fact that he ate his pizza with some utensils, right? So, thank you, Chris, for your feedback there. Much appreciated. Going back over to the email, Alyssa writes in, she says, personally, I think that, as a politician, you need to have the mental aptitude as well as being presentable. Even in this age, strong leaders are necessary, so if you appear ill or sickly, the people who you wish to represent will have concerns that you would be unable to do the job because of your health. Citing an example, Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election was a perfect example. Politics aside, she had multiple episodes that went viral that put her health into question, that made people doubt her ability to be president. Thank you, Alyssa. And back in 2016, I think a lot of people do remember that. And it did leave a lot of people asking questions, what's going on? So thank you for your feedback there. Let's go over to Amanda in California, who writes, I agree that appearance is not important when choosing who to support and who not to support politically, and certainly should not be focused on more than ideas and policy. However, there are inevitable times when we become frustrated with the lack of humanity of some politicians and the stripping of human rights they may be inflicting upon many. And it exhausts us to the point where we turn to childish behavior to express our disgust and let off steam. Sometimes it feels good to clown on someone we hate, and for the most part it is relatively harmless, as they have better things to do, I hope, than vainly search their names all day. Many politicians are bad people, and no, their appearance and such should not matter, but although it should not take time away from the news cycle, yes, people are going to mention certain vain things to cheer themselves up and find something to laugh about in the midst of despair, and something tells me Mitch McConnell isn't up every night crying because people are calling him a turtle. That's from Amanda in California. Thank you for your thoughts, Amanda. And that's going with the approach that, look, a lot of people might not be satisfied with the political system. They might have their disagreements with one party or another, elected officials, their viewpoints, their policy, etc. And as a result of that frustration, while it can and should be taken to the ballot box, in the meantime, it's an appropriate and relatively harmless way to let off steam. So thank you for your thoughts there, Amanda. Going over to Luke, I believe in Italy, and I apologize, I don't have the location information, but I know you're a regular listener, and I believe you are from Italy there, if not, I apologize, who says, when it comes down to looks being on a pedestal, the moral high ground on the subject is absolutely not. You should be able to present your case regardless of gender, looks, or race. But the reality is, yes, it does matter. The way you look is, in a sense, a reflection of yourself. The way you hold yourself, the way you take care of yourself, your body is like a temple and should be treated as such. Now, that being said, not everyone is gifted with everything, and that is unfortunately the way it goes. Humans are mostly shallow. We will naturally drift to whichever performer catches our eye more. You can sing your song and do your dance, but if you're not a leader, then you're not a leader. You mentioned in your podcast personal attacks on politicians, and that got me interested that you also thought, in that sense, to me it seems like personal attacks are too common these days on anything, really. The fact that attacking someone verbally is so common and there is no restraint or even second thought about trashing anything that we're opposed to or whatever opinion we hold. He said there's no respect for anyone but oneself these days. So thank you, that was Luke. And that's an ideology. I mean, again, to go even a little further from what you said, I see that every single day just on the street. No respect for anyone but themselves. And I kind of talk about that, and it seems like a lot of people can be very nasty, self-centered, just angry overall, you know? Let's go next to Tony. She has a few recorded thoughts for the program.
So this is my personal opinion on whether or not looks matter in who we vote for. I do think it does matter. Should it? No, not as much as it does, because political attractiveness is completely devoid of policy content. However, I think it's human nature to lean towards an attractive candidate if we know very little about them. I know for me personally, I had a hard time liking Obama at first for the simple fact that his name rhymed with Osama. It just reminded me of Osama bin Laden, who was one of the most hated people alive at the time. And it took me a while to warm up to Obama just for that reason. So while that's not looks based, it's pretty shallow to judge somebody just based on their name.
Well, thank you, Tony, for your feedback, and I appreciate your honesty there. But I think a prevailing trend that we are seeing with a lot of responses is that looks shouldn't matter in the world of politics, but obviously, perhaps due to human nature, they do, of course. Now, you actually had another question. It was not necessarily relevant to the topic that's being discussed, but since you did include this in your email, I'll just go for it anyway. Why not? It's a minor divergence. But she just said, I noticed somewhere in one of your videos you mentioned that you enjoy watching true crime. I'm a big fan of it as well, but my question is, you seem to be a very non-violent, peaceful person who doesn't enjoy inflicting pain or wishing misery on others, so why would you choose to watch true crime when that's what the show is constantly showing and describing? So thank you for your question as well. When it comes down to true crime, you can have an interest in something, but not necessarily support it, right? Like, one thing that always fascinates me is human nature. Humanity, in and of itself, is just a fascinating thing. Not that I was ever any good at sociology or psychology, but that doesn't mean that there's no interest there. It's of great interest to me. And it interests me to see how people are, both good and bad. I always try to just treat other people with respect, kindness, and dignity. But just because those are the ideals that I put forward in life and day to day, that doesn't mean that I'm going to isolate myself in some sort of bubble and just say, well, I'm only going to surround myself and expose myself to like-minded viewpoints that affirm what I feel. It's interesting to see things from all viewpoints and all angles, and also for the sake of entertainment as well. Just because I watch the true crime stuff doesn't mean that I have any desire to now say, yeah, I want to go out and do this to someone or whatever. No, not at all. It actually just helps me understand this stuff better. And the legal system, law, all of that has always been of great interest to me as well. Same thing with all of this. Yesterday, I was watching some documentaries on 9/11. Of course, a very, very, very morbid event. I was reading about various intelligence agencies and some of the very unethical means they will utilize to get what they want, and many other things. Not all smiles and rainbows and positivity, but at the same time, I try not to let those things, affect the way that I think. And look, I have a very jaded view of society. I think a lot of people have seen that. But what I always try to say is, there's so many terrible people out there. I think people are getting worse and worse. And that this world is just really filling with hatred and narcissism, and it's just crashing and burning. But there is no reason to lose hope. That despite the ever-growing number of vile people in society coming out of the woodwork, there are still good people out there as well, and there are still things worth continuing on in this world for. And you cannot lose hope, and you cannot be too jaded. Like I said, it's okay to be realistic, but don't lose who you really are. And try not to let that negativity completely overtake you. Hold out and remain positive and stay strong. That's how it is anyway. How about we go over to Pete in Idaho, who is writing in. He says, I certainly agree with you that physical appearance should not play any role in politics. However, it seems to be more and more prevalent with each passing election cycle. I remember the famous tan suitgate scandal from 2014, and I was blown away by how these highly paid professional journalists were spending countless hours criticizing it. I never expected to turn on my television and see 4 talking heads analyzing a president's choice of wardrobe. In the end, who cares? Unfortunately, it's only gotten worse, with candidates openly attacking each other's appearances on nationally televised debates, often to disturbingly enthusiastic cheers from the audience. Whenever these attacks occur, rather than turn the other cheek, the reaction of modern politicians seems to be to sink even lower in their counterattack. I believe this ultimately comes down to the type of society we live in today. We live in a world where we feel empowered to say any nasty thing that pops into our head about anybody over the relative safety of social media. There are many people that relish seeing their elected officials sink to a similar level, and it makes their own transgressions feel more socially acceptable. In addition, candidates in modern politics understand the power of going viral. For example, going on television and saying Donald Trump is a fat slob, or Bernie Sanders looks like he brushes his hair with a balloon are statements that hold no real value and utterly fail to explain why you are a preferable candidate. But they will draw far more views, shares, and likes than coming out and saying Donald Trump's budget is fiscally irresponsible, and here's how my plans are better. In this day and age, people don't want the boring politicians of yesteryear. They want theatrics, and most importantly, they want to feel like their representatives relate to them. Seeing their chosen representative act in a certain manner will make a percentage of the population feel empowered to act in a similar manner without shame. I hope as a society we can move beyond this one day, but in our current climate, I have my doubts. Very eloquently written, Pete. Thank you so much for writing in. Let's go over to Lucy in England. She says, in response to your last question, right away, I don't think looks should matter at all in politics. These are going to potentially be very important and influential people, and to back them based on anything other than their views, policies, etc. would be foolish. And I do think the general populace is sensible regarding this. I doubt there are many folks out there voting for someone they oppose in every viewpoint just because they like the look of them. But when it comes to the opposition, it seems like anything is game. It doesn't seem that folks dislike a politician because of their appearance, more that they dislike a politician and then resort to lazy criticisms. After all, it takes some amount of research and effort to criticize them based on their standpoints, but it's very easy to look at someone and say they look a bit weird. It also feels a little mean-spirited to bring looks into it, since for every politician with a particular feature, there will be other unrelated people out there with those same features. When you start to associate behavior you dislike with a certain appearance, it only contributes to a culture of unfairly judging people on harmless ways of expressing themselves, or for features they can't even control. And indeed, particular ways of dress have gained a negative reputation just because certain groups of people stereotypically favor them. Perhaps that's thinking too deeply into it, but it's certainly something to consider. From Lucy in England. Thank you, Lucy, regular listener. And it's interesting that you mentioned that. One thing that I remember getting criticized on, and I remember I was kind of shocked that someone would even go ahead and, it's like, why, you know? I have this black overcoat that, of course, I would wear quite a bit in New York, but even here in Florida, when it gets a little cold in the winter, granted not very cold, I will wear it. And, it's just a full-length men's overcoat, single-breasted, goes down to around my knees or so, long coat. And a lot of people in New York City, especially white-collar workers, wear these coats. You see it a lot. I always just think of it as like a businessman's overcoat. Where especially, again, in New York City in the winter, you will see lots of people that, with the suit, they have these long black coats that they'll wear with them. So, when it gets cold, I'll wear one of those too. But granted, because, Donald Trump, he came from New York City as well. He wears the same coat. I remember once I was wearing it, and people were criticizing and attacking me because I was wearing the same type of coat that Donald Trump wore. Even though I bought this coat years before he ever even ran for president. But now I guess wearing an overcoat brings about a negative connotation. And that's taking it way too far. Let's go over to Eric, who recorded a couple thoughts. Welcome, Eric.
Hello, John. My name is Eric. I live in Winter Park, Florida. Somewhere around your neck of the woods, I do believe. I am a newer, let's call it recruit, to the Review Bra fandom community. Let's use the word community. But, yes, looks should matter a little bit. Obviously, a certain amount of hygiene goes into it. You need to, be clean, present yourself, not have your hair be a mess. But other than that, I don't think it should matter so much. It shouldn't matter, and I'm just talking regular people here, whether or not you want to wear a suit, which is not necessarily in style, not in fashion, which if they want to wear a suit, that's fine, as a regular person. If you want to wear jeans and a t-shirt, like I do, nothing wrong with that either. As a politician, I would say the same thing. They're considered more professional, business professionals, so a suit should be still more traditional for them. But, if they want to go out, into a small blue-collar town and do a meet and greet, they should feel free to wear, whatever they want. If you want to wear jeans or, khakis, any type of slacks and like a polo or even a t-shirt, that should be fine. And if they want to come in a full suit too, that's fine too. But yeah, I don't think you should be judged based on how you choose to appear. But when it comes to what you can't choose, like you said, people making fun of some of the older politicians, like Bernie Sanders, for example, saying, he looks old, he looks, or not Bernie, Joe Biden, they say, tired. He looks tired, he looks old and tired. Like, that's not something he can choose. If you look a little bit older, you might look tired, even if you're well rested. And, you shouldn't be judged on that, is basically the point I'm trying to make. So, yes, looks matter, based on what you can choose. But as long as you're clean, who really cares? What makes you happy? Whatever you want to wear, whatever makes you happy, that's fine. I don't know. Like I said, we live in an increasingly casual world, at least in the U.S. So if our politicians started dressing a little more casual, that's okay with me. Basically what we should really be focusing on is whether or not you agree with their stances, their values, and all that.
Well, welcome to the community, Eric. It's great to have you here. Nice to hear from a Central Florida listener as well. And thank you for your feedback. And when it comes down to appearances, absolutely, like you said, I think there needs to be a little bit of a most basic standard. But aside from that, if they want to go casual, well, that's all right. If they want to wear a full suit, that's fine too. Like you said, I think there are a lot more important things that could be discussed instead of, let's say, whether the person is wearing a full suit, or if they're wearing, khakis and a polo, or, yeah, you'll never see this again. But God forbid, let's say they're wearing a wing collar with a necktie. Sometimes I'll wear that look. It's a very antiquated look from the early 1900s. I like the way it looks, but sometimes I'll wear it and, why are you wearing that, etc., etc. Thank you, Eric. All right, now we hear from Jackson. He says he's a first-time correspondent. Welcome to the show, Jackson.
Hey, Ruby Bra. This is Jackson. This is my first time sending a correspondence, and I have this written down, so if it sounds like I'm reading something, it's because I am. I usually listen on YouTube Red Audio or SoundCloud whilst I'm working on my farm job in Southwest Virginia, and in response to last week's question on whether looks matter in politics, I think, of course, if anyone wants to be taken seriously about their political career, they should dress neatly and appropriately. But as far as the way someone's hair is, or what colors they wear, or just their all-around appearance, I think it is a total giveaway that you are too lazy to take time and put together an actual argument about why you disagree with this person. I completely agree with you, and I think it is stooping very low and is a very foul political practice. And to close out, thank you very much, John, for your podcast, and I hope to be able to put more input soon on another topic.
And thank you, sir, for your feedback and for writing, and pleasure to have you listening, and always happy to get your future correspondence. Chelsea writes in, and she has been a long-time listener. I remember she's been here since the early days in 2014, so thank you for being just a regular listener for the duration. Now she writes, in regards to your question in the last VORW regarding whether or not looks matter in politics, I don't agree at all with criticism of aspects of people's appearance that are involuntary. I also don't care about looking respectable as a concept. I care about how people act, and I think that one reason people criticize the appearances of others is that people might be uncomfortable with voicing their real grievances, which might have absolutely nothing to do with what they are actually criticizing. It's a way to smokescreen bias, whether or not that bias is justified. It's also just easier. However, I believe that there is something to be learned from how people choose to present themselves. For example, politicians whose appearances seem to be engineered to appeal to the largest demographic possible really creep me out. I personally prefer Bernie Sanders' comparatively disheveled appearance to Joe Biden's eerily even tan and constant smiling, dazzlingly white teeth. Now, you also do mention looking too old, and to give my opinion, I don't have a problem with politicians looking old, but being really old is kind of an issue. To me, both Sanders and Biden are too old to be president. At 78 and 76 respectively, they would both be above the average male life expectancy during the presidency. Either one would have to have a damn good vice president in the event of their deaths. So thank you, Chelsea, with your views and feedback there. And that's one thing that I have noticed you see a lot with certain political candidates, where they try to appeal to the largest possible demographic. But maybe that strategy pays off. Thank you for your viewpoint there. Joanne in San Diego is writing in. She says, I think that looking good always gives politicians and public figures an advantage. I don't think it's fair, but it's human nature. Unfortunately, not everyone overcomes human nature with rational thought. This seems to be even harder for female politicians. Ones like AOC or Kamala Harris have it easier than someone like Hillary Clinton, who had to hire a stylist. On the other hand, there are men like Chris Christie, who seemed to get by just fine regardless of physical appearance. On a side note, it's interesting how folks with unique polarizing looks who own it develop such a rabid/thirsty fan base. The first time I noticed this was with the singer K.D. Lang, and you seem to have a similar thing going on. Human nature is bizarre. It certainly is quite bizarre. Thank you for writing in, Joanne, in San Diego. Chris Christie, I remember, I think on a national level it was different. I remember when he was the governor of New Jersey, I knew a lot of people in New Jersey, and I remember some people had some very not nice words in regards to him and his weight. And needless to say, I heard many, many expletive-filled rants about him during his tenure. But again, I think on a national scale, you didn't really hear it as much, just in Jersey, where you had many people who felt very strongly about his term as governor and his actions. I think we can squeeze in some more feedback. Let's go over to Max.
Hi, John. My name's Max. I'm from Wellington, New Zealand, the windiest city on the planet. It's true. Look it up. I've been an avid listener now for about 2 years of this podcast, and I've been a watcher of your channel for about 5 or 6 years now. In regards to your question about looks in politics, I think while obviously looks aren't important for the ultimate goal of voting on a politician that you support their values and you support the policies and their kind of outlook on life, while that shouldn't be important, I think that because of the very nature of being a politician, it's so public. It's in the most public sphere, maybe, of any profession, up there with like entertainers and these sorts of things. Your look is the face of your political brand, and your look is the face of what you're trying to push, ideologically or otherwise. It's what people see, and that's very, very important because humans are such visual things. And I think every single person, you, me, the people listening, everyone, has positives and negatives to their look, dependent on who's looking, really. So, I could see a negative thing in one person, I could see a negative thing, and then one other person could see the same thing and see it as a positive. And I think what happens is people elevate a certain very distinct thing about a politician's look on either side. So the supporters will see that thing, or maybe a different thing, and elevate it up and say, look how good it is. They'll take their height, their dress sense, their physique, how well they speak, or how socially savvy they are, and they'll elevate that up, perhaps out of proportion to what reality is. And people who are opponents will do the exact same thing. They'll find something about them, with trumpets, the hair and the face and the cadence of speech, and they'll just rip that apart. And I think people do the same thing with Bernie Sanders and things. Everyone gets it. And while I think it is childish in a sense to mock someone's looks, people have their beliefs, and they if they think that an opponent politically is kind of the antithesis of their beliefs and their values, a way of dethroning them and invalidating them, maybe through looks. And, in a perfect world, looks wouldn't be paid any mind, I don't think, but I think the fact that people do make fun of politicians and the way they look so openly, it's an act of expression in a way, and I think we're kind of lucky to be able to do that and not get executed on the spot. And, it is going to be childish because that's just the nature of people. We are childish things. So I think it's just one way of, showing your support or non-support for someone. While it is childish and while it may be, biased, it's just, that freedom that you have to do that. And people definitely go overboard, but I think also, I don't think it's an awful thing for politicians to be made fun of their looks, because they get made fun of for everything else. I think that a look should be something they're secure in. By the time they get to that age where they're a serious politician, they shouldn't be worried about it. And while that doesn't excuse awful, misogynistic, racial, whatever kind of remarks, I think ultimately it's pretty frivolous.
And thank you, Max, for your feedback. And with that, I think that's all that we really have for today's discussion on looks, whether they matter or not in the world of politics. If they're important, if they're not important, trivial, or essential. So thank you to all of you for sharing your viewpoints and opinions, and it was wonderful to have a wide variety of viewpoints on this matter. That's the beautiful thing about it. And always remember, on VORW, I always welcome any viewpoints, supporting, opposing, middle of the road, or anything in between. Well, with that said, always remember that next week's discussion is going to take a turn to the universe. Do you think there are multiple universes, or do you think that ours is the only one? I'm just curious to see what other people think about this, what your reasoning is, if you think this or that, if you think it has to be or isn't, or anything. I'd like to hear it. VORWINFO@gmail.com. Explanations, stories, you name it, are always welcome. Again, VORWINFO@gmail.com. You can type up your response or record it and send in the audio file, should you wish. So there are many ways to go about doing that. And as always, remember that I do have the special broadcasts to the Bahamas, and a lot of work goes into it. As I recorded it earlier, I think I said about 10 minutes of news, but I have updated it. It's 20 minutes of news now in every broadcast. Again, many features, discussion and perspective there. And then some of the entertainment programming as well. And the broadcasts are having an effect. The other day I got an incredible email from a listener in Freeport, Bahamas. He said, practically everything is cut off here, but I have my emergency radio. I caught the show on 5010 kilohertz. It was great. And he just said, I really appreciate the balance of the news and music. And I think it's emails like that to know that there are people in the target area right there on Grand Bahama that was impacted so terribly, that this broadcast is reaching and getting out to, that make everything that goes into it more than worth it. So it's incredible. Thank you all so much to everyone out there who helped this broadcast become a reality. Also, the broadcast on 1300 AM from WNQM Nashville is, again, it is developing, though I did do a test transmission to determine the effectiveness the other night on Saturday, and response was great. The broadcast blasted into the Nashville area, and believe it or not, I got reports, people were able to pick it up even in Birmingham, Alabama, over in North Carolina. Someone in Indiana heard it on 1300, and actually in Florida, I went outside with my portable radio, I picked it up, and it was even making it in all the way from Nashville on the AM over to Florida. So it's reaching a huge, huge geographic area for an AM station. And already feedback was great for the test transmission, so I know it's going to be wonderful. It's going to reach a great new audience as well. So with that, again, feedback is always welcome. VORWINFO@gmail.com. And since we're at the very end of the show, there's no harm in asking once again. Consider supporting the program via PayPal to VORWINFO@gmail.com. Patreon at patreon.com/The Report of the Week. Last week's show, the Kubrick Show, got demonetized and pulled from the search for a while. I guess the algorithm hates Stanley Kubrick. I appealed it, I contacted them, and they brought it back, but, too little too late. It was already shot down and killed. So, could happen to any show. Nothing was earned last week, aside from your support. Keep that in mind, otherwise there's no way to keep this broadcast going out to the wonderful listeners all around the world. You included. You're a wonderful listener. And thank you for tuning in. Take care. This is VORW, and I will be seeing you again next Thursday, the 19th. Take care.